All right, well, thank you everybody for attending the class today. It's sort of going to be like a Bob Ross version of basics of photography. So this is not meant to tell anybody that they're doing something right or wrong or how they should do it better, but basically to give you some instincts as to what could you do the next time you go out and it be a little bit more exciting and not as challenging. And so some of the things, if you're a very seasoned photographer, you'll find very little of this information useful. But if you are still learning and eager to see what some of the dynamics of, say, nighttime photography versus astrophotography and things like that, radio control devices, this might be for you. Now, just an example, this first photo that you're looking at right now, this is a 30-second long photo. And we'll talk about editing later on in this class. But you'll see why editing is so important, because everything I do, I shoot in what's called RAW, and I'll explain that in just a little bit too. But as a 30-second photo goes that you're looking at, this was actually almost Twilight. So it really, you couldn't see that much. But with the power of Cambre sensors that we're going to talk about, how important those are, it's just pounding photon after photon on that sensor and picking up and keeping them and restoring them when you turn it into a JPEG later on. So had you been here on this beach when I took this photo, at that moment, you would have thought that'll never be a pretty photo. And then after a while, in doing time lapse, you'll learn that you'll look at something and right away you'll know I've got a winner here. So with that, we'll proceed with the program. So once again, I'd like to welcome everybody to the Association of Lifelong Learners, and this is a basic photography presentation. This is an aerial view taken from a drone of the 1870 lighthouse, and this is in the autumn of the year. A lot of the drones these days have a lot of ability to take photos in low light and bright light. You can change these conditions on the fly. Here's the topics that we're going to include today. We're going to talk about camera types and brands, such as for including phones and drones. We're going to talk about lenses, quality, megapixels, and sensors. We're going to talk about camera functions, the shutter speed, aperture, ISO, bulb, and focal length. And then we'll talk about portrait versus landscape photography, nighttime and astrophotography. We'll mention drones, their photography and video, some equipment that you might consider using, tripods, memory cards, lens cleaners, batteries, flash, and lens hoods. And then at the end, we'll talk about editing these things and also information that's available on the internet and YouTube, which is endless. And by the way, this, if you have my email at the beginning and at the end of this program, I have typed all this up so I can actually email somebody a copy of this information so they don't have to take a tremendous amount of notes. All right. So when we talk about which brand to choose of a camera, a phone, or a drone, what do we zero in on first? Are we looking at megapixels, sensor size, zoom capabilities, storage? That's another important one. So let's get to the phones. And this one, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, change slides, please. My apologies. Oh, another one. Yeah, next slide. And there's our topics of discussion there. So we can go on to the next slide. And once again, this is where we were saying whether megapixels, sensors, zoom capabilities, is it storage, you'll have to kind of think, what do you want? What is most important to you? We'll go to the next slide. So I did some research on the current telephone market, and there's nothing like this one right here. This is to say that I'm telling you, you need to go get a Samsung or spend $2,000 or whatever this thing runs. This is actually a Galaxy S21. I thought I had fixed that, but it's a S21 Ultra. And this thing has an unprecedented 108 megapixel camera. I've got a powerful Nikon camera that is 45 megapixel, but this still doesn't compare because it goes back to the size of the sensor. But nonetheless, a 108 megapixel telephone is insane. It is unmatched in quality. The image quality is incredible. It has another camera on there that's a 48 megapixel camera, and it's used strictly for telephoto. You wouldn't believe what that thing does, and it'll take on any other phone manufacturer in the world at this point. There's another phone on there, another camera on there, the third lens, and it's a 12 megapixel camera, and that's for taking ultra wide videos or photos. But you take a picture with a 108 megapixel lens on this camera, and you would be shocked at what you can zoom in on. And then once again, the 48 is for telephoto. It's just going to amaze you. So check that out. And really, every other phone out there on the market, you would want to use this as a benchmark and then compare it to that, whether it be an Apple or whatever brand, and then look at you might want to chart the different things that this can do versus what you're looking for. Next slide. Okay, on the drones, I'm just going to go ahead and throw this out here that the Mavic 2 Pro and the Mavic 2 Zoom are pretty much at the top of their field. Price-wise, they're incredible. There are a lot of drones that go up to $64 million or down to $10, but for a drone that can go up to 5 miles away and last for about 30 minutes and have the resolution that these two guys do, it's a great drone to compare what you're looking for, compare it to these two guys, and then make your decision. There is so much that these things can do, and one of these two pictures here, there is one that's called a Pro, and that has the 1-inch sensor, and that's what my Nikon has, and that's pretty much going to take, yeah, that one there will beat the Zoom. The Zoom does zoom in and out, but it has a smaller sensor, and though it has more megapixels, it's the sensor that is the horsepower behind this. So that doesn't mean you shouldn't get a Zoom, you should get the Pro, but these are just two units to look at and compare what you're wanting to get in the way of a drone compared to these two guys and see what features and benefits that you might be excluding or including. The gimbal is very important if you're really interested in taking even a still shot or any videos at all. So there are 2 gimbal and 3 gimbal type units, and the 3 gimbal, basically I ran this drone of mine at about 30 miles an hour and it came to a screeching halt, and you could see the drone flip around in the air, but when you played the video back, you didn't know that drone was even moving. That's how good these gimbals these days, they're impossible to fool. Next slide. So, cameras, where in the world do we start? There's the selections of types, brand, landscape, portrait, astro, nighttime, scientific, video, price, megapixels, sensor size, ISO, DSLR, mirrorless, interchangeable lenses. All these things we want to think about when we make our next camera purchase, or to identify what you have and see if you need to step up. Next slide. So there's 4 main types of digital cameras. There's the compact, there's one called a bridge, there's the DSLR, and then there's the mirrorless. Now there's a few other types out there, but these are the 4 main ones that you want to pick from as you change cameras or improve. First one, next slide. Next one is called, it's a compact. So we've all seen these, they'll fit in your shirt pocket. It's a point and shoot type camera. It's compact in design, and it's primarily used just for simple operations. Most of them are focus-free lenses, or there's an autofocus if there is a ability for a lens to come out and retract. These automatic systems set the exposures and have built-in flashes, and they do a really great job. But if you're looking to get into more serious type photography, then these things are they're gonna leave you wanting. Next slide. So this one's called a bridge camera. And so this is a nice camera. It fits in between the point and shoot camera you just looked at and what you're about to see in a minute. That's the single lens reflex cameras, the digitals. So these things came a long way. They're very handy for a lot of people with the built-in flash. They got the zoom lens that go in and out, and they have a nice fit for a quick grab your camera and point and shoot. But if you get into more serious photography, then you're going to want to leave this one at home. Next slide. So then we get into the DSLRs, and that's called a digital single lens reflex camera. It's a digital camera that combines the optics and the mechanisms of a single lens reflex camera, but it has a digital imaging sensor. So the reflex design scheme is the primary difference between a DSLR and other digital cameras. So this single reflex camera permits the photographer to view the image that will be seen through the lens, and therefore you see exactly what is going to be captured. In absence of that, you are not necessarily guessing, but with the DSLRs, you're pinpointing exactly what the lens is going to do, and you're putting the crosshairs on it. Next slide. Along came the mirrorless, and they're a fantastic addition to the DSLR, but they are a single removable lens camera, just like the DSLRs. They have a digital display, but they don't have a reflex mirror or an optical viewfinder. But they weigh a whole lot less, and I suspect that one day you'll probably see everybody have a mirrorless as time goes on, and not the heavier DSLRs like we just showed. Only thing about these you have to think about, if you put a heavy lens on this, I've seen people put their shoulder strap on and screw that into the camera, and they're lugging around this big heavy lens. The camera I've got, the DSLR, it's very stout, but still, you put a shoulder strap on this camera body here, the mirrorless, and then attach a large lens, you're going to be twisting and torquing the metal around on that, and one day that's going to come back and bite you. So as a food for thought, be sure that if you have a lens that has an ability to screw the shoulder strap into it and not the camera body, always screw it into the lens because it weighs more than the camera. Next slide. So camera brands, let's have a little fun here. So which is the best brand? And that's like asking what kind of cough syrup works best. You ask 4 people and you're going to get 400 answers. Next. So in this display here, you'll see on the right-hand side all these different manufacturers. Some of them are probably even out of business. But which one of those is the best? You can pick any one of them and find that it does things that the other guy might not be able to do. So it's a matter of sorting out. Next slide. Sorting that out it's a pretty big project. But their help is on the way. So there's things like Consumer Report, CNET, PC Magazine, and others. Best Buy, Google. There's a lot of these places that you can go and make a comparison with the cameras that you're interested in. So let's say you want a Pentax, and you also want to look at a Nikon or a Sony or a Canon. Well, you can push on different models in there and hit a compare button, and then you'll see all the differences in there. They'll help you weed out the one you don't want and direct you to the one that you do want. These things are invaluable. I have used these every single time I've made any kind of an electronic purchase, whether it be a phone, camera, you name it. Next. So there's some major camera points to think about, and I don't say that this is my opinion. This seems to be the world's opinion. In order of importance, the very first thing you should look at to max out a camera is going to be the sensor size. In the past, it was megapixels. That was king. How many megapixels do you have? Does that thing have a Hemi? All those things we used to laugh at. But it turns out that sensor size made every bit of difference in the world. That is, simply put, image quality. The next one is important, is megapixels. So the more megapixels that a sensor has, the bigger the image it can create. So if you have a half-size sensor and 100 megapixels, you'll have a crummy picture compared to a 1-inch sensor, full-size, and half of the megapixels. This goes back to this sensor, but megapixels will be the next thing to push. And on the third one, so if you get your sensor and megapixels figured out and get happy with that with whatever your budget is, then lens would also be very important. So the faster a lens is, meaning if you had a lens, I'll just throw out a number, say like it's a f.4, an f4 lens, but there's a lens that's a f1 lens. Well, the f1 lens is going to let in tons of more light. It'll be more clear, and your picture is going to come out a whole lot better. Well, there's 3 major categories of lenses. I mean, you look at this, it's almost like data overload. Which one do you get? You've got prime lenses, you have zoom, and you have wide angle. So these are the top 3 categories, and I'll mention a couple others after this. Next. So what is a prime lens? And that's the one that tends to produce the sharpest of the images of them all. They tend to perform better in low light conditions, and they make you take your time when you're composing your images too. They are lighter and they're more compact than a zoom lens, and they tend to be less expensive than a zoom lens. There's a lot less glass in them. So that's the pros, but the cons is that you're not able to zoom in and out, and you have to physically move to change the composition of your photo, and you also may wind up carrying more than one lens. So let's say like you want to go out and do an astrophotography, and you want a 14 or 20 millimeter lens, and that's a prime lens, okay? Oh, but while I'm out there, I also want to get that barn over there. Well, here comes your 50 millimeter lens. And oh, I forgot about that mountain over there. I need a 600 millimeter lens. So the prime lens, though, is going to be the most fantastic of them all because it has the least amount of glass in it. Next. Along come the zoom lenses, and you can zoom in and out as you need, so you don't have to move your tripod or yourself around, and they can replace 2 or more prime lenses. Some zoom, I have one that's 150 to 600 millimeters, and I don't know how many lenses you could buy that were one at a time that would fill that category, but it's probably 10 or 15 of them. And this way, you don't need to change your position. You just recompose the image by dialing it in and out. So they are fantastic. But the cons are, they are a lot bulkier, and they're a lot heavier than any of the prime lenses. So the images may not be as crisp and sharp as they would be with the prime lens. So if let's say I have a 18 to 100 zoom, and I want to shoot a 70 millimeter zoom shot, a 70 millimeter zoom prime lens would do a whole lot better than a variable zoom lens would do at 70 millimeters. They may not perform as well as prime in darker situations also because once again, there's more glass in there. And so having more glass you're going to sacrifice some image quality. And the last thing is that they tend to be a whole lot more expensive. Next. Along come the wide angle lenses, and these are ranked between 17 and 40 millimeters. And that's the one that fall into the category called a wide angle lens. So what the pros of that are that you can photograph very large objects like buildings. They create interesting perspectives, and they are available in very wide apertures. So a wide angle lens, the cons of that is that the wide angle lens often has issues with distortion, and a lot of times that can be corrected in editing software, but then when you correct it and you remove that distortion, you just lost a lot of your image, but you can do it. They're not very flattering for portraits, and the high quality options can be expensive. And I do have one that's a 20 millimeter that I use for Astro, and that thing was around $900. So, but it does its job. So next slide. So here's a couple of other types of lenses we'll discuss, and that's like what's called telephoto, and that would be from 70 millimeters on up. So with these, you can photograph without being noticed, so you can be a long ways off from a subject. You can compress the perspectives. You can shoot in very, very tight spots. You can frame it, your photo in so many different ways, and you can pick up on details from distances that are so far away you couldn't possibly have seen them. The cons are, of course, the size and the weight, and the faster shutter speeds are required, and then it's called shorter focal lengths are more versatile. We'll talk about focal lengths here in a little bit. It's a term we almost never use. We'll talk about it briefly, but it's something you really don't have to remember, because basically focal length is the distance between where a picture comes sharp in the glass of your lens and that distance between that and your sensor. Who cares? Next one. So the other ones, kind of lenses, are macro and fisheye. So the macro lens, the pros of that is that they can capture the details of an object like no other, and even more than you can see with the naked eye. These will, of course, these will take down to fractions of an inch. And the fisheye lens, it's a cool, interesting, wide field of view with a lot of distortion. That's also the cons. It's a wide field of view with a lot of distortion. But that's kind of a special effect thing when you get to the fisheye. Never was meant to like do portrait or put on a cover of a magazine. They have their place, and that is a unique perspective landscape photography. So we'll talk about lens quality. It is true that you get what you pay for. And so an example, and I just used Nikon. There's other fantastic lenses out there. I just picked on Nikon. But it's like a Nikon brand 50 millimeter lens at f1.8 is $220, f1.4 is $449, and f1.2 is $2,100. There is a lens I looked at, and I forgot who the manufacturer was, but to go from f1.4, it was $1,500 for that lens. For f1.4, $1,500, f1.2 was $15,000. And it's like, do I really need that? Well, National Geographic does, and maybe, you have to be a high-end photographer, and most of us really would never see that. But when they're gonna blow something up to the size, of a barn, then that's where that kind of thing comes in handy. For most of us, we're not gonna ever really need a quality lens like that, but they're out there, so you do get what you pay for. And so in the case of a Nikon, a 180 to 400 millimeter lens with an f4.5 to 5.6 range is $2,300. But just to go with a prime lens to achieve that 400 millimeter at f4.0, that's a $12,400 lens. So you can see right there for, 5 times less, you can get a 400 millimeter picture. So that's the case, once again, where when you're shopping for a lens, think about all these things and use that compare button, or create a spreadsheet where you can start writing down, this one has this f-stop and this many millimeters and this kind of quality, and then you can start zeroing in on the proper lens to choose. But quality will also help make for a crystal clear picture. This particular photo that you see right now, I took with a 20 millimeter lens, and it is a f1.4, and it's called art glass. And all I can tell you is that sounds fancy, and it does a great, great job. I suspect the art glass means they just polish that glass up and put less glass in there for it to be this good. Next. So megapixels is more better. Now this was taken from a drone, this photo here. The megapixel resolution plays an important role in how large that you can print your pictures. So more megapixels equals more details recorded. A high resolution camera can make larger prints or crop a shot without worrying about the image's pixel structure becoming visible. So if you had a 12 megapixel camera, which used to be the best in the best, and you put it up against a 50 megapixel picture and you blow it up to a 3 foot by 4 foot photo, you'll see all kinds of pixelation in the 12 megapixel photo and almost none in a 50 megapixel camera that it can produce. So it's horsepower. The more megapixels, the better. And so if you can incorporate that to your search, then you'll know what camera. It's kind of a juggling. I want the megapixels, I want that sensor, but I have a budget. So that's where the spreadsheet comes in handy, or the compare functions. But this just gives you some information if you want to make a decision for your next purchase, what to look for. Just an example of sensor sizes. A camera sensor dictates the quality of the images that it can produce. So the larger the sensor, the higher the image quality. So bigger image sensors have bigger pixels, which means better low light performance, reduced noise, good dynamic range, and the ability to obtain more information. So dynamic range, you see the letters HDR from time to time. What's high dynamic range? Well, that camera there, if it has an HDR function, basically takes two photos. It takes one and measures it for the light part of the photo scene, turns around, takes another picture of the dark part of it, and then computer blends them together. It's a fantastic way to shoot. But most of the time when you do that, that turns it into a JPEG photo, and then you don't have as much data that you can work with in editing unless as if you had shot that in RAW. But does it save time? So you can just kind of see from this, it's kind of like a TV. You have a 20-inch TV, and you look at a 60-inch TV, and you start doing the multiplication factor about how many square inches is involved. It's amazing, but you go from the full frame sensor, which is 1-to-1 ratio, and then the next one down. It's amazing how big a difference there is. And I did have the next size under the full frame, and I thought I was doing great. And then I stepped up my game, and when I got that full frame sensor, it's like you can't take a bad picture. It's amazing. But I had the money. I worked all my life to get that, and it's costly, but it pays off. Next one. So sensors, and we used to never talk about these things. We never knew that they existed, and they didn't because we were in film for so long. But the sensors, the picture quality and the exposure flexibility are the main reasons why people buy the DSLR camera. Number one reason. It's the most important criteria. It's the size of the sensor. It didn't just come from me. Once again, this is all the critics out there saying the same thing. The best photographers out there will have the largest sensor they can get. Next. We're going to talk about camera functions here. We're going to make it kind of simple, but sometimes you get a manual out, you open up, buy a new camera, and you look at all these things, and you get lost, totally lost. We're going to talk about the things that really make a difference, and those are shutter speed, aperture, ISO, bulb, and focal length. The first thing that we're going to talk about is shutter speed. So it's one of the most important settings to know as a photographer. It does not get any more fundamental than shutter speed. To be specific, the shutter speed is the length of time that your camera sensor is exposed to light. Essentially, how long your camera spends taking a photo. And as simple as that sounds, though, shutter speed has an enormous influence on how your images appear. So if we all remember shooting in film, we always remembered if you could overexpose and underexpose film, and you would get dramatically different effects. So we're just basically painting a sensor with light and using shutter speeds to dial in for perfection. An example of shutter speed, there's a campfire in my backyard, and I took 2 photos to prove. So this is a shutter speed of 1/8 of a second, and my f-stop was f3.5, so it was not. It's like in the middle. Next photo. That's at 1/4000th of a second and wide open f1.4 lens. So you can see how often do we ever see a freeze frame of a flame, but you can see the difference in 1/8 of a second versus 1/4000th of a second. It totally freeze frames. So that's where you're starting to get into the hummingbird photos. That's what you're going to need, about 1/4000th of a second. Next. So let's talk about aperture, and sometimes you look at all this information and it just totally wears you out, but it's important too. So It's kind of confusing when you say that a f1.4 is more open than a f22. So having struggled with that through the years, I finally decided that, simply put, that a large f-stop number means a large amount is in focus. And a small f-stop number means very little is in focus. That's the easiest way for me to remember this. So at f1.4, you can see on this chart that it's going to be the brightest, and you follow at the bottom from the widest open to the closest. Along on the bottom there it says brightest, bright, medium, then it gets to the darkest. That's kind of good to know. So, and at f1.4, very little's in focus, and at f22, almost everything's in focus. So they mentioned here a small depth of field and a large depth of field. Well, that gets old trying to figure all that stuff out, but it's just best to know that if you go to a f1.4, the smallest one you have lets the most light in, and you sacrifice things being in focus. But that's also perfect to use, and we'll see in the next example, next photo. There is f5.6, and my camera would actually go down to f1.4, and I tried it, but at f1.4, this guy's nose was in focus, and that was all. I couldn't believe it, or an ear. So it was at f5.6 for I really, okay, now I've got his head. And I just sit there with my viewfinder, they call it live view. So you swing that and you're looking at live view. And as you dial this around, you're just watching it come and go, which is a perfect way to take photos. Go to live view every chance you get if you're playing with a scene, and you can see what's going to happen, and then you know when to snap your photo. I think that's one of the most important things is live view. If you have that on your camera. So had I went with like f16, which is the most that one will do, then every single thing you see there would have been in focus, in sharp, crisp focus. But that's a beautiful thing about playing with the f-stop. You can bring things in and out. I took a wedding shots years ago, and there was 3 old men playing some wood instruments, and everybody before and after them were completely out of focus. Just those 3 old men. It was an unbelievable photo. And that was just luck, because I didn't even know what I was doing back then. But I never forgot that, and I learned that that's one good thing to remember. Here's another one. These are some mushrooms, and this is done at f5. It's with a 50 millimeter lens, and these things were about 2 feet away. So had I done like f2, for example, then just a part of the mushroom would be in focus. And so once again, you can sit there and detail this thing right in front of you. Oh, and let's say f16, then everything would have been in focus. So playing with that live view, I could dial it in and out, and this wound up being kind of a cool photo where you see the mushrooms in the background, and some really just immediately behind the mushroom go out of focus. So you can see by looking at these things how you can play with the f-stop and have some dramatic results. Another one is that this is a toad, or actually a lizard, it's not a toad. And this was a 200 millimeter lens, now it's about 3 feet away from it. And so at f6.3, that's about as fast as small as that f-stop would get on that. And I thought it was pretty interesting that part of the lizard is in focus, not even its head, but just a part of around the neck is perfectly in focus, in that leaf. But you can see as you look towards its eyes and its nose, that's already out of focus, and right past that leaf or its neck, it's already out of focus. That's pretty remarkable with a 200 millimeter lens that you could do that. So had I taken the f6.3 and dialed it up to like f22, then of course everything would be in focus. But there's less light. So you got to take your ISO and ramp that up in order to get enough light in there. And of course, you'll see that in live view, you know just exactly what to do. That's the beautiful thing about, or looking at it on your phone or whatever. You just start moving these numbers around and you say, okay, now I've got enough light, and away you go. But you could use that f-stop to change all your little focal lengths there. It's pretty cool. So here's an example of ISO, and that's called the International Organization for Standardization. So at ISO 50, and everything else on the camera is the same, that flower has very little light on it versus ISO 800. And we'll talk a little bit about that more in a minute. in ISO 200. So you can just sit there and get your camera on a tripod or set and start playing with the ISO. And once you get the ISO, wow, there's a lot of light, and I can move those other numbers back around to get it back to a more of a normal photo. Next. So is ISO important? It is simply the camera setting that will brighten or darken a photo, just that, using that function. If you increase your ISO number, your photos will grow brighter. ISO can help you capture images in darker environments and be more flexible about your aperture and shutter speed settings. So it's a 3-ring circus. You take any 3 of those and start playing with them. You can move them all around and change your brightness. But ISO is chief, that's what it does. So raising it has consequences. So if you take a photo at too high of an ISO, here comes the grain, here comes the noise, to the point that your photo might not even be usable. So brightening a photo using ISO is it's always a trade-off. You should only raise your ISO if you are unable to brighten the photo using your shutter speed or your aperture. So trust me, if you have an ISO of 64 versus an ISO of 10,000, oh my gosh, you can already picture it in your mind. There's going to be so much noise and electronic clutter. It's insane. But f64, just like in the days of film, 64 speed film, 32 speed film, remarkable, no noise. So there is a trade-off by going ISO. Next. Here's another example. Now, this is remarkable. So here's a Canon multi-purpose camera that has an ISO of 4 million. This just happened. I thought when Sony hit 200-something thousand that was off the scale. That's like you smoking a cigarette at a football field away and your face looks like it's daylight at 4 million. I don't even know if that's probably way beyond that. And the Nikon D6, their top one, goes to 3.2 million. I have a Nikon D850 and it only goes to, I think, around 120,000. I still have yet to find a need or a way to use it, but it would be probably special effects. Because that kind of, the darker it gets, the more you have to ramp up your ISO. You could not achieve photos playing with any other function that we've talked about except ISO in the darkest of conditions. So ISO's got its payoffs, and sometimes that's all you have to rely on. Let's talk about bulb for a minute. This is a really cool, fun thing to shoot with. And so it's simply a shutter speed that you open it up, and now it's in manual mode for the most part, and it can be any length that you want it to be. So a couple ways of achieving that is some cameras, you can have a cable release. So you push the cable, and it locks it in place. Some of them, you have to just sit there and hold that thing. And I have one that has a remote. So I screw my remote into the camera, and I can press that button and walk away and let it just go and take imagery in as it sits there in a wide open lens. So that's how this photo, for example, this lightning storm, that's not one photo. So it was put in bulb, and as this storm traveled, or as it had multiple strikes, it just sit there wide open and collected all this data and gives you this kind of image. So it's taking in information as long as that shutter is open. That can come in handy with a number of things like special effects. Of course, the lightning storm is one of them. You've seen those photos where there's cars going by and you see the big long red streaks where they're taillights. And on the other side of the street, you see the bright white lights, that's their headlights. So bulb has a lot of neat things you can do with it. You can, you can just imagine some of the other things that you can do in the bulb mode. But most of the time you have to really dial down. For example, it's like I want to take a photo of, I want some lightning strikes. I look through my viewfinder, and let's just say I see a water tower on one side, and on the other side is a gas station sign. Okay, I know now that any point in between those two items in my viewfinder that I just saw, when a lightning hits, I got it. So I put it in bulb mode, and there's a thunderstorm going on. Of course, I'm out of range of the thunderstorm, but I'm just sitting there waiting, and I have my f-stop as high as it'll go, like f16, f22. So very little light is coming in, and when that lighting hits somewhere in between those 2 points of reference, there's your lightning strike. And people used to say, wow, how did you time that? This is how you do it. Nobody can time it. Nobody's that fast. So that's a fun thing to play with. Now here's another example of bulb mode. Now I have a maximum of 30 seconds on my Nikon. And so I was just moving this thing around playing. I thought, let's try bulb. And I had my remote. So it just wound up, this was 35 seconds long. What I noticed about this photo is that at 10 seconds, the reflection was way shorter than this. So with each second that passes, these things kept getting longer and longer, because whereas what we see microsecond to microsecond with our eyes, those things are hardly even there. But as you continually pound that sensor with the photons over a 35-second period, it illuminates the furthest distance from that light more and more and more. And so it is remarkably clear how this came out. I was on shoreline and zoomed in on that as well. So there's an example of how bulb can get you some dramatic footage. So we'll talk briefly about focal length. We just have to bring it up because it's out there and people will use that term. So what does it mean? I mean, once we talk about this, just, really don't worry about it. But you can see in the picture here, it's where something that's coming into the camera at the point that it's in focus in the glass of the lens. It's at that point, what's that distance from that focal point back to where your sensor is, or it had been filmed in the days of the past. And so it's always done in millimeters. And so sometimes you could look at your camera and say, I need to dial in. I actually, once in a while, you might want to say, that object is 13 millimeters away. Okay, maybe then would you ever do that? And most of the time, you're going to focus by using your eyes. But once in a while, you take a tape measure and go, this is so detailed, I have to be 14 millimeters away. That's about the only time you're going to use focal length. But it's just kind of an explanation of what it is. I hate to bring it up, but because it's out there, at least we covered it. But you can kind of let that one go and move on. So just another easier example of, if you had a 50 millimeter lens or a 20 millimeter lens, you can see, look how much of that photo you can get in. And then you step up to a 50 millimeter lens, notice how it's remarkably less. And then you get to the 500 millimeter lens, and it's just a 5-degree view. But you know what? Do we really need to memorize that? We don't, because we see that when we look through the lens and we see what's going on. We got that figured out. But it's just what focal length is. You'll see people talk about it. Now we're going to get into landscape photography. And so the experts out there are saying this would be true for drones and phones and big cameras, that is really between 100 and 200 is the absolute best. You can do anything you want. This is the Bob Ross version. Again, do what you want, whatever makes that photo look good for you. But everybody thinks that landscape photography demands a small aperture and a huge depth of field, but there are times where you want to make your scene really sharp, and sometimes you want to kind of break it up and have a little bit of a blur. It's what you want. But like this one here, this is a photo taken about 300 feet up, and I think my ISO was at 100. And because of that, everything around it came into focus. And this is one of the first photos that got me into a little bit more into photography up here in the Presque-Isle area, or this part of Michigan. So the landscape is the art of capturing pictures of nature and the outdoors in a way that brings your viewer into the scene. So from grand landscapes to intimate details, the best photos demonstrate the photographer's own connection to nature and capture the essence of the world around them. So landscape photography is a lot of fun, and whether you do it from your phone or whatever you're using, there is so much to explore in this part of Michigan. I'm glad to be here. In portrait photography, that's the type of photography aimed at capturing the personality of a person or group of people by using effective lighting, backdrops, and poses. A portrait photograph may be artistic or clinical, and an 85 millimeter lens is absolute king. So I'm gonna pass on another little trick that I don't have a slide on it, but One day we were at a waterfall, and I told my wife, I had a tripod, my camera set up on the tripod. I said, I'm going to try something interesting here. We'll put it in 4K video mode. So I just hit the play button and it started recording, and we're taking now high quality pictures, 30 pictures a second. Now, when you play that back, in 1 second, you have 30 photos, and I watched her eye go down and come back up as you're hitting the arrow button in playback mode, because you're not watching it in video mode. You freeze it in playback mode, stop right there and hit your arrow key on your left on your keyboard, and you're watching it. You hit it 30 times and you just covered 1 second of high quality photos. And that's like, you know what? You want to forget this cheese and everybody line up. Set your camera, if you have that kind of ability, set that thing up on 4K video, push that button, everybody just kind of mill around, and then say, well, in 10 seconds, you have 3,000 photos. 10 seconds at 3,000 photos in 10 seconds. And so really to find the good one in there, it's not hard, because you can put your finger or a cursor on the slider and start moving around. And you say, okay, we're starting to get some good photos. And all of a sudden, then you can start hit your arrow key and zero right in on something. And that's how I got my wife. This one photo of her said, how in the world did you do that? I don't remember you saying, no. I said, I just asked you to move around and kind of strike a pose, smile. And in there, I guarantee you, every time, is the photo of the century of that person. They won't know that they did it. That you couldn't possibly set it up and say, cheese or not, you couldn't do it, but it's there at 30 frames a second. People are going to think you're world famous. So that is one of the neatest little tricks that you could come up, that you could use to test. But don't even tell anybody. Say, hey, just step in front of the camera a little bit, give me about 10 seconds, and then see what you have.
That's a very old photo.
Yes, I took that actually last week. No, I'm just teasing. Yeah, I just thought for portraits, I said famous portraits photograph. And so in here you can see where they have the shadows and everything in the background is out of focus. That's one of the nice things about portrait photography. A lot of times you try to get everything in the background out of focus or in the foreground, but there are times where you want all of it in focus. You have to figure out what composition is per photo. Next one. So again, here's another one where that was set up to take a photo and the background.
Yes.
Yeah. So the short telephoto lens of the 85 millimeter enables optimal working distance between the photographer and the subject. So at 50 millimeters, you got to get kind of close, and sometimes people are a little uncomfortable with that. And then if you go like 135 millimeter lens, then you seem like you're kind of weird far away. And you're not really shouting at them, but there's something about 85 millimeter lens. That focal length is just known across the land that is the one that works the best. So I've asked on the forums, I said, if you have a 50 to 150 millimeter lens, for example, and you set that at f80 or at 85 millimeters, is that the same as an 85 millimeter lens? And I can't get people to answer that. I really think it is. It's at 85 millimeters, it's probably going to work, but I can't get anybody to say, absolutely, yes, that's the same thing. It's weird. Nobody wants to say that it is, but we just talked about earlier about having an 85 millimeter prime lens. Well, I just covered that if I have a 50 to 150, for example, and I'm dialing in and there's an 85, I'm pretty sure you're going to have an outstanding photo at 85, no matter what type of lens you get it to do that with. So, and let's get into nighttime photography. This is so much fun because most of us don't do it and don't know how easy it is. But let's say like you have a camera that has vibration control. It's critical that you turn that off. And autofocus, you got to turn that off no matter what your camera is. And so also a tripod is super handy. And the main reason is because we're dialing down some of these numbers. Actually, we're taking our f-stop, we're trying to get it as high as we can get it, like f16, because everything will be sharply in focus. But hey, maybe you wanted it at f2.8 and have that building in focus and something before and after that. It's just something to play with, but you'll find there's a whole other world out there when you get into nighttime photography. And also, if it's breezy, then it'd be great to have a tripod, because you would not believe what little bit changes. In fact, when I was getting in some of my nighttime shots, I kept seeing like, why is that thing not perfectly sharp in focus? And it turns out one of them was vibration control. I thought, because it's moving inside that lens and you don't even see it. So it's trying to correct something. I flipped that off. It got better, but it still wasn't there. And so then when autofocus, I thought I hit it, it got it. It's still trying to focus. So you turn that off. Now it's best just to go to manual. But once you turn off vibration control and autofocus, you're pretty much going to dial in. You're going to be there. But any little bit of breeze, that's one thing. If it's breeze, you kind of got to watch that. So then you need to try to increase your shutter speed to make it take it quicker. Another one, when I fought this one night, and it was the dang tripod. So I had it up kind of high, and it was this new composite material. And so, I'd like press a button, that thing's moving around. You couldn't see it. So that taught me to put it on like a 5 or 10 second delay. So now you try to keep it all calm and you reach to them, gently touch that button, and then it'll wait 5 or 10 seconds, everything's settled down, and boom, here comes your sharp pictures. Wow, it took me a while to figure that out. But there's so much to explore out there in nighttime photography that you'll see all kinds of imagery that most of us don't look for because we're thinking about daytime shots. So once again, using a manual focus is really the best way to go. And also install a lens hood. I'm going to give you a number of things about nighttime shots here. So lens hood, I'd heard about it, so all right, I'll get a lens hood. I'll put it on. It's a kind of a long one. I thought, I don't know why, but I'm going to do it. That's what the experts say to do it. So I realized, wow, it's getting kind of damp. I said, wow, look at that. I feel some moisture on my camera. I felt the lens hood, and there was moisture on the lens hood. Took my flashlight and looked down inside the lens, and there was nothing. Had that lens hood not been on there, that moisture would have formed and condensed on the lens, and you'd be wiping it or losing your photo. Your best photos in the world might be right there, and dang it, if I'd not had that lens hood. So we'll talk about lens hoods a little bit more, but that's another good thing to have, even at night, especially at night. Next one. So this one I took up in Sault Ste. Marie. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like, wow, look at those clouds. And the ship was sitting there, and I was like, when does this happen? When do you get something that close? So in nighttime, also, hey, bring a flashlight, or headlamps are really great. And some of the headlamps that are now using have a red, little red deal, so you can see what's going on with your camera. I thought, well, why does red matter? Well, the beauty of red is that it's not messing your eye up to see what's going on. Because once you put a bright light on, then you go, let me see what about that star and that moon. My eyes have to readjust terribly. But with a headlamp and a red light emitting from it, it'll help you get your settings right, and your eyes don't have to adjust. Next one. So at nighttime, we want to use the low ISO as possible, and it's just going to make the photo sharper, but sometimes you have to go to an astrophotography, you got to step it up. Next one. So once again, I say in nighttime, I definitely would be shooting in RAW if you have the capability. And RAW forces you to, of course, edit and post and make them look a little bit better.
How long was that for?
That one there, it was, this was actually about a 60th of a second, because that was on a drone. And I remember messing with that one to get this. I could look at it, so get pictures, and I adjusted some of the settings. But at 1/60, I think I had the aperture open as much as I could, because that was just like, well, it was almost dark, like if you were there, but it really helped light it up. Now this is a nighttime shot, so it was pitch black outside, but there was a moon. So you can see the stars up in the sky, and the moon actually lit that lighthouse up and the building and the trees. You'd think it was daytime. So when I looked at it, when I put it back on my computer, I went, I can't believe it looked like it. I couldn't believe I did it, but I didn't even know what I was doing then. But so point is take test shots, and move it around, move your numbers around where you can perfect to get what you want it to be. And live screen is a big help. But even at this, I didn't really realize what I had until I got it on my laptop. I went, oh, wow. I didn't really have to adjust this photo hardly at all. It's just weird to see a lit up lighthouse, but stars in the sky at the same time. That moon is, very bright. It's amazing what it can light up. There's a nighttime shot in Fort Worth, downtown scene. Just kind of neat to play with the lights and the shadows. So once again, if you can bracket your shots, and I did that here. So there was a number of them where like I went f2.8 and moved it up to f16, just moved it all around. And this one wound up being the best. I think it was like f8. But just play with those things where you get things in and out of focus and get them as sharp as you can. Next one. So here's another little fun nighttime one. So that's a person standing there, and it was really, this has been twilight. So this is a 30-second photo. So I told her to stand off to the side. This is in the 70s. And in 20 seconds, I count down, said, I want you to just briskly walk in the scene and stand still. And so what it is that you're painting the film. You're painting the sensor with light. So there wasn't enough time for her to get painted onto the film back in the day, or sensor, whatever it may be. So that's the fun thing about nighttime. You can play with all kinds of little trick photography things. And I've seen one where, I had one that I did years ago. It was a chair, and it was kind of dimly lit. And it was a 30-second photo. So in 15 seconds, a friend of mine walked in and sat down and waited 5 seconds, got back up and walked off. So there was actually a pretty solid figure sitting in the chair, but a ghost moving in and a ghost moving out. So just stuff like that, it's just thinking outside the box. And it's so easy to do that with digital too, because you can throw it away or delete it if it doesn't go. And you can just turn right around and say, okay, I need to do that one for 40 seconds or 20 seconds, or dim the light, or change the f-stop around to where you can get it to be like this. This one, play with different shutter speeds, obviously again, and experiment with the bulb mode and beyond. So I was at the lighthouse out there at Presqu'île, and you see a moonbeam. I've never seen this in my life. I'm just sitting there, and I just happened to have my tripod all set up, and I went, why is that lit up like that? And I looked back, and it was just a shaft of light coming from the moon. It was cloudy, and it opened up just like that. I'd always seen that with sunlight, but I'd never seen that with moonlight. So, you snap the picture. So, that's another thing about nighttime photography. You get stuff like this sometimes. You go, wow, I can't believe I got that. I'd never seen that. I've been sitting there watching Perry Mason reruns. Next one. Here's another example. So, nighttime photography, get out there, play with the remote control. Be sure to bring extra batteries. Think about that. Warm clothing. You better think about it, because this is Michigan. And know your surroundings too. I've got friends that was up in New York, upper state, and he heard noises out there. He thought it might have been a bear. Well, he didn't know what it was. He said, but it was very large. And he was out there all by himself out in the middle of nowhere. So, it's kind of, just think about that where we're at. There's all kinds of nice little animals out there. But this is a 3-second shot, and this is my niece. And she was sitting still, so you can see that this is low light conditions. So for this to have properly become a good photograph of light, it took 3 seconds to do that. So that's why I thought, okay, just start walking. And I hit this, just start walking toward me, and I hit the deal. And she walked, she probably covered, 6 or 7 or 8 feet. But that's the result, because it never had enough time to paint her image, because she wasn't sitting still. So it got all these little images and painted it in a 3-second period as a moving object. So you can see right there, that's kind of cool. You'd also get to where you can follow a car and then snap it with a long exposure time. In that last second, you'll have a blur and then a car perfectly in focus. So once again, the night shots are some things to play with. So we're going to talk about astrophotography. And this one was, I just started doing this. I've seen all these photos. I thought, I got to try that. So I started doing some research on it. And wow, so I've gotten a lot of phone calls and emails on this. How do you do it? And it's amazing. Like one guy said, I'm going to turn you into an astrophotographer, and I want you to write down 3 things. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And those 3 things will get you an image just like this. Now, granted, I did have to go in and edit some of this. So when you look at the Milky Way galaxy, this is the Milky Way galaxy core, and this is the core of it down here, meaning that as you look at the edge, the Milky Way galaxy is this big spiral band thing, but there's the very center, the core of it, that's where all the stars are. And so that thing is more visible, it's visible from March to October, but in April, end of April to end of July, you can't miss it. But still, with our eyes, you got to collect more data, more time exposure for that to pile up on a photo like this did. And I could have cleaned this up a little bit more, but it was just fun with the lighthouse beams, little spokes going out like that. But astrophotography is, there's a guy that has my kind of equipment, and he's doing stuff with nebulas with a 200 millimeter lens. I couldn't believe it. But he has some software and patience. So we'll go to the next photo. So this is one that was taken over there on Grand Lake, and because the nature of astrophotography means you're taking long exposures, photos of something we can hardly see with our eyes. We want to maximize the amount of light that enters the lens. We want to make sure as much light as possible hits that sensor as fast as possible. So I was taking some photos, and one of them, I think is in here, was 35 photos I took. Bam, 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 bam. And then I took them and put them in Photoshop, and I lined them all up. I piled them all on top of each other. And there was one guy that did that with 900 photos, and it took his computer 8 hours of sitting there to do that program. 8 hours. He couldn't touch his computer. But this, like Photoshop with 30 photos. What it does, you take 30 photos, and it throws them on top. Here's another one. So here comes more light, more light, more light. And then you process that. Then you send that file over to Lightroom. Instead of darkroom, it's a Lightroom, and you clean it up. So it's not really cheating, but how else are you going to get a Milky Way galaxy core to show up? And actually, I have photos that are a lot cleaner than this one, but you can see the reflection down here in Grand Lake, and there was a little bit of movement. It picked up the rocks and the stones down in there. So it was pretty amazing. And then it turns out that there's a thing called the 500 rule. So there's so much stuff. 500, what does that mean? Okay, everybody says, well, shoot Astro at f2.8 and do it at ISO 3200. And then you take this number 500, and if you divide whatever length of your lens is into 500, it tells you how many seconds long you can expose it before the stars start appearing as trails. So you have 500, you have a 20 millimeter lens, that's 25. You got 25 seconds you can play with. And I said, but I have a f1.4 lens. That's way better than f2.8. I'm going to just see if I can blow that rule up. Sure enough, I dialed it down to f1.4. I went to ISO 10,000 in like 2 seconds instead of 25. So once again, it's all about going out there and playing with the numbers, move the dials around, see what you're going to come up with, and don't always go by the rules. Next. And this is more recent here. So this is the light from Alpena over here. That's the light pollution. And I caught that galaxy core here just recently. This is like at the end of it. You see it's where in the summertime it'd be on up here, and it's just slowly moving down the horizon where now soon it'll be out. So this one was ISO 6400. This is f2.8, and it was 6 seconds. And there's your numbers right there. You write those things down right there, or you go execute that out at night, and you're going to get stuff just like this. That's one photo. That's not 30 photos, not 60. That's one single photo. And that's really a lot better than the F500 rule. I've got 3 things I can remember. But once again, depends on your lens and your sensor. But there's a perfect way to start. You get those 3 numbers down and start kind of moving around and playing with them, and you'll see what I'm talking about once you start looking at them on your laptop or your computer. And there's you're now an astrophotographer. That's the 1840 lighthouse here. This is another one where I just realized, I was looking the other day and said, oh, there's a meteor. And that's not a plane, but that's a meteor, because this actually on a smaller deal, that's blue and that's green. And a plane doesn't do that. So actually called a shooting star. So you really want to try the darkest sky possible. So if you're shooting in downtown Alpena, 10, 20, 30 times the photo you do if you're out in like Thompson State Park or something like that, away from light pollution. Once again, it was able to capture that Milky Way galaxy core with one single photo. Next. Now this is another, this next photo here is you're catching the wagon wheel spokes of the lighthouse. One more. Yeah. And the stars really came to life. And then over here, I didn't know at the time, you couldn't see it, but that's a little bit of effect of the northern lights. And so somebody else had done a photo of the Neowise comet. I was standing right beside him, and they got home and they posted a photo, and here's all this green light, and I didn't have it. I said, what gives? She said, my photo was 30 seconds long, and yours was like 5 seconds long. I went, oh, so in one way, imagine if I had, this is like a part of a second photo here. So imagine if I had had this on for 30 seconds. Well, number one, the spokes, the wagon wheel spokes of that lighthouse would have been kind of a blur, which would be okay, but that would have been a whole lot more green. So just kind of unusual. It was there and I didn't even know it. You can't see it, but unless it's a full-blown going to town type of a northern lights, then you'll see it. Next one. This is one of the latest ones I did too. I thought it was kind of cool. So I was playing with light. And so anyway, astrophotography, the northern hemisphere of the Milky Way galaxy core is visible from March to October. So we talked about that. And you can't see it from November to February. But this is another single shot. And what's kind of cool about this one is this light up here at the top of the lighthouse is the blur that it did. There was a little bit of haze in the air, not much. And you really don't want any. At the same time, I ran a flashlight, and I mean, we're talking dim as I could possibly. I had to put a cloth over it, which shot up the side. So, I'm really standing right by the lighthouse, and just give it a neat perspective. Had I had a phone and just held it up like that, the whole thing would be illuminated. It's unbelievable. When those cameras are wide open, man, they pound that sensor with light. So I did one time, I just did a flashlight like that. And a little pen light flashlight, and that whole tower was solid white. Like, man. So this one I had to really subdue it, but once again, getting out at night and having a little fun, playing with your settings. But that's a single shot, and that's the galaxy core. And really, in about 2 weeks from now, I couldn't take a photo like that; it'd be gone. Next one. So for like greater moon photography, and this is pretty important. So. And not in this particular one, but in the full-blown full moon, 200 millimeters is minimum. 600 millimeter, which I have, it's still like, wow, you got to zoom in on your computer to fix it. But the ISO of 100 is really a good place to start. And zoom your lens out as far as you can, and then try to use like f11 to f16 for the sharpness. And so that happened to be, remember the old moon of the Victorian area, the 1800s, where, they had the moon, he was looking off at something. I caught that one right at the right time. Like, I was looking at it, I had to be actually in another part of the room. I was coming back in to look at my laptop, and I realized from a distance, that's that old moon that they had cartoons of. This is another one where you want a tripod, autofocus off, all those things turned off, and maximize your sharpness. Next one. Now, I got lucky here. So a bright full moon is a popular subject, but it moves quickly across the viewfinder. I mean, you set it up on a tripod, next thing you know, you're readjusting your tripod already. That moon is already drifting off. Stars aren't as fast, but the moon's very fast. So I thought, what the heck? Okay, I was down there by the beach at Presqu'île. I thought, I'm gonna try it. So I stepped up as fast as a shutter speed as I could get and still realize, okay, it's gonna work. And I opened up, did change my dynamics right there on the fly and handheld that. And I've never done it. I'll never be able to do that again, where I did a handheld shot of a moon, zoomed in, and it came out clear. Once in a million shot for me. I mean, you gotta have a steady hand to do that. But anyway, because of the way it moves so quickly, you wanna just play with your settings, make sure. Oh, another thing. So if you have live view, it really helps if you zoom in on the moon as much as you can and move that focus ring around because you're in manual mode, and you think you got it as clear as possible. If you have live view and you can magnify that, I learned that yesterday. Yesterday I learned this, but you can magnify it, and then you're zooming in on what you've already zoomed in on in the live view, and you'll see if you're really in focus. So the next time I do a moon, I guarantee that sucker is going to be sharp. Now I know how they do it. Found out yesterday. All right, next one. So this is one that kind of took my breath away. This is one of my first shots over the drone. I put the drone up in the air and I'm like, oh my gosh, because it was beautiful out there at eye level. And then when you start raising that drone up, you go, my gosh. And then so when I posted that, there was tons of people saying, I've been living here all my life and I didn't know it looked like that. And I did one where I flew from Crystal Point over there and filmed this and then went back. And that was like my first 5-minute one. I'm like, oh my gosh, where am I? Where have I moved to? It staggers the imagination out here. So anyway, the drones, you got to find out what your need is. Like, is it going to be for fun? Are you on a budget? Are you a beginner? Are you serious? There's some things just to kind of play with if you're going to go into the drone world. So the camera drones enable us to access spaces and create compositions in a lot of new ways. So from amateur to professional, weddings, travel, sporting events, it seems like the days that drones are being used everywhere. So good camera drones are very powerful tools that have high definition camera capabilities for industry leading image quality. Once again, sensor size, the ISO range, the shutter speed, the photography modes, and there's a bunch of different modes. I just discovered a month ago that I have a function on my smart controller that I can kind of just drop and drag a square or a triangle around something, and then I can have 6 modes. It'll take off and fly past it and come back. It'll go around it in an ever-widening circle, and 4 other functions I didn't even know was there. So, you buy something, you think you got it figured out. No, there's more to come. The 1-inch sensor is the one I have. That can capture at least 12 megapixel photos, but it's really going to be higher than that. And they shoot in 4. So I would say if you're going to get one and you're going to get a little bit on the serious side, you really need 2 things. No matter what, you need to shoot in 4K video, and then get one that has a gimbal. I've seen too many of them where people, I got me a neat little drone, and it's all jittery like that because they don't have a good gimbal. It doesn't float. It's just kind of rigid, and everything's moving up there on a drone. So when you get to the 2 and 3 axle gimbals make all of the difference in the world if you're going to do a video. So gimbal quality is important, but there's a lot of drones out there now. You don't have to get into like a Mavic 2 Pro with the Hasselblad lens and all that stuff. There's a lot of neat drones out there right now for 1/10 that price. So just if you're going to kind of think about getting a drone, try to look at 2 or 3 axis gimbals and 4K. Oh, by the way, let me go back 1 second. Yeah, if not, well, if you, it was that one there. Yeah. Sorry about that. But we can stop there. I'll just say that the last photo that you saw, there was this zigzag, okay, this right here, and it turns into a circle. I was wondering, what is that? Yesterday I'm going through my files, and I'll be dang as there was the video part of that. And so it actually started off at the beach. And what that is, waves are coming in, and they're stirring up this sand that's pretty white, and then there's a current out there, and you can see it on live, just going on out there. All this time, you have this information, you don't even look at what you've done, but it was pretty cool, because where on earth do you see something like that? But there it was in North Bay. That's not Bermuda or the Bahamas, that's right here. And that's just the sand stirred up by a wave and going on out into Lake Huron. Pretty cool. So you never know what you're going to get with a drone. Next one. This is one of, there's the old lighthouse, and there's the new lighthouse out there. So the drone videos have also followed the camera quality. In the past, that's like you either had one or the other. One was good and the other one wasn't, but that's all changed. So really the minimum quality, if you're going to get a drone, try to at least get 720p quality, but the 1080s and the 4Ks are just the way to go. And once again, the three axis gimbals are flawless. And this is one I got, but it's like this. It's not necessarily this one, but it's just to show you that what drones have become. So they're small, they're foldable, they're easy to pack, to go hiking, backpacking, traveling, quickly assembled and on the go, and avoid carrying a large, heavy suitcase. It becomes pretty inconvenient. So when I first saw one this size, I thought, well, that can't be that good, because I've seen the other, like the Phantoms that this same company makes, that are incredible. I thought this is going to be just like a little toy. But once I saw it had a Hasselblad lens in it, then I thought, okay, now you got my attention. So it turns out these things really, they do an incredible job. And the one I got at the time was like $1,400. Now I think it's around $2,000. But it does, it'll go 30 miles an hour. It'll set the air 30 minutes. It'll go 5 miles out. It actually would go 5 miles up. But fortunately, I keep mine geo-fenced where it won't do that. And there's people that will override that, but you take down a big jumbo jet or something, you gotta live with that the rest of your life, yeah. So I was actually at a boat race, and there's this lady about my age was saying, hey, how high up does that drone go? I said, well, it'll go 5 miles, but you're not supposed to. I said, mine's restricted. I keep mine at 390 feet. She says, well, good, I'm a pilot, and we're told that we can't go below 500 feet. Oh, so there's a guy in Russia who sent his up 25 miles. And I saw the video. It's like, but it's probably very remote where he did. Still, I mean, who knows? So it's amazing what they're capable of doing, but I strictly stick by the geofence that is often updated. A friend of mine was getting married in Florida. It's right there near an Air Force base in Panama City Beach. And mine, when I set my drone up, I tried to, it says magnetic interference over and over. I said, well, can't send it up. The lady that was photographing it said, oh, I see you're trying to get your drone up. So last year I was here and I did get it up. I overrode it somehow. And I'm photographing the wedding, and all of a sudden I could tell the United States Navy took over my drone. She saw it right there, and she said they sent it right out into the Gulf of Mexico. And they could have figured out who she was. And they probably figured she's learned her lesson. She says, I wasn't about to go knock on the door and say, I need a new drone, because she overrode that magnetic interference or geofencing. So I thought, good lesson. I will never, ever do it. It's not worth. But one time, we were talking earlier, I was out there on Long Lake, and all of a sudden, where's my drone? I couldn't even tell. Next thing I know, I had sent one way, it was coming back from the other way. So somebody, somehow, some interference took that drone and put it somewhere else, and I couldn't figure out how. It wasn't me. So be careful with playing with drones. Be careful. Where are you? Stay away from high lines and things like that. They're a lot of fun, though. They're a lot of fun, but there's some responsibility that goes with that. And this is a photo I took up in the Presqu'île River in the UP. And you follow this river and it goes right out, dumps right out into Lake Superior. It's an incredible area. But so I'm just saying, with a drone, it can be bright and sunny, and or it could be at sunset. Right there as you're flying, you can change a lot of these settings. Probably good to get used to those when it's 5 feet off the ground, because if it's up there and you hit the wrong button, it might be, who knows where it's going to go. But for the most part, it has a lot of range to this camera and this video. And once again, explore all these settings. You'll have so much fun with it, whether it be your camera, your drone, or your phone. And if you can post-process and shoot everything in RAW. So if I shoot a JPEG, in fact, when I was first started doing this, I said, wow, I've got a 20 megapixel camera when I did. And I said, my photos are only like 5 megapixels. And then I got my big Nikon, a 45 megapixel Nikon. Why are my photos only 20 megapixel? I thought, what do I not know? So anyway, I dug into it. Sure enough, you set it to RAW. And so what RAW basically does is what it sees is what you're going to get. But it is almost like the way we see it. But wow, that collects so much dang data. It is unbelievable. Because even in 1/60th of a second, we see it at the speed of light. But even in 1/60th of a second, that's a whole lot more times it's got photons pounding away and filling up that sensor to get views just like this. So, but then in RAW, instead of Samsung or Nikon or anybody else telling you this is what I want you to see, I'm going to determine what you see in a JPEG. I do that. I took control of that. So I shoot it in RAW. Then I send it into Lightroom. And most everything you will ever see me do, and you look at it on Facebook, I've hardly ever touched the colors. I almost never saturate a thing. So if you check me out later and look at all these photos that you see me do, I never touch the colors. I don't say super saturate this or that. It's there. It's amazing. But somebody told us in their firm of RAW into JPEG, they just kind of cheat the system. So I take control of that using editing software. And that's the kind of stuff that you can get. That's brilliant there. But it was that kind of a day too. So equipment, let's talk a little bit about equipment. Make sure you get all the bells and whistles, or maybe not. Okay, so, can you believe that? Wow, imagine saying cheese for that thing, you'd be a mile away. But go to the next one. So this is kind of a little funny, one of those steampunk cameras, where people make all kinds of deals. So let's talk about the tripod real quick. Make sure it can support your camera and your heavy lenses. So once again, if you have a heavy lens, be sure that you mount it to the tripod and then attach your camera. There's all kinds of heads out there for your tripod, a ball head, pan head, gear head. Oh my gosh. But let's say like a fluid head. A fluid head would be great where it has a handle and it so much resistance. So you take your finger and in video mode, you just get a certain amount of pressure and it's going to maintain a steady movement, and you can't do that with the others. But the fluid head is perfect for doing video. But in the most popular one is ball head. And so basically it's on a ball. There's one spot where it can kick all the way back, but a couple loosen the knob and boom, you're swiveling all around, boom, you're right where you want to be in seconds. And that's why it became the most popular. Do you want one that's too heavy or too light? Well, it's windy conditions. Better get a heavy one. Or you have a lighter one, you can attach a sandbag to it and hold it down and lock it in place. So the more you extend those numbers, the legs on it, then the more wobbly it's going to get. Then you got to increase your speed and you got to start playing with all those numbers. But a good one also allows you for very long exposure, minutes, hours. There's a guy that does videos. I've become friends with him up in upper state New York. He might be out 8 hours. And oh my gosh, his name is Noel Thomas. And so he's got the Milky Way galaxy core as it moves across a farm in upper state New York with billions of stars, lightning bugs. It is unbelievable. Thanks to that tripod and that thing moved around. Here's another good one, memory card. And that is critical, class 10. I've done a lot of research on this, and trust me, just class 10. You get a class 10, you're off and running. At least a class 10. All the others, take a picture and you may have to wait, and then class 10 just speeds it up. And look, they're up to a terabyte in size. These little flat little discs, they go up to, that's 1,000 gigabytes. It's insane. Now this one has a read write. You can see 170 megabytes a second. I mean, if you take a picture, it's already throwing that thing to your card and you're ready to take that next photo. Otherwise, you got to wait. Like you'll click and that thing's not going to let you do anything yet. But at 170, click. But some of them go up to 1,750 megabytes a second. And they read it that quick from camera to that, and they write it back to your hard drive at 1,400 megabytes a second. That's insane. And they're specialty cards, but it's just good to know that one of those things, blockbuster point, get a class 10, and these things have gotten a lot cheaper, but class 10 is the only way to go. So equipment, lenses and sensor cleaners. I hate to spend time on that, but wow, I had a photo. I thought, man, this is it. This is the best. I couldn't believe what I did, what the camera did, what our area provided for me to push a button. And I'll be dang if there was clutter, there was crud on the sensor. I thought, is that a seagull out of focus? Like this big on the photo. Nope. It was, I cleaned my lenses, inside out, looked at the mirror and took photos, and it's still there. I went, oh my, how in the world did something get where the mirror comes down, well, opens up, take a picture and closes? How did something get inside there and land on the sensor? And it did, and it does all the time. So they sell lens cleaners, they sell sensor cleaners. Like, so it could be a certain type of a sensor cleaner. And in my case, it's like a little, looks like a little broom. And you put this fluid on there and you sweep it across one way and stop and bring it back the other way. And it's glass coated, so it's safe, but you have to sometimes clean the darn sensor because it happens when you change lenses out. So now I take a lens, I hold my camera down and release that lens, and I have a bulb that I squeeze air, and I just go ahead and blast it out, blast my lens before I screw that in. I have not had any trouble since. But and also another one, I thought, what are these unusual spots all over? You remember that ship I did? Well, there was another one I did the day before. What are all these spots? Well, it had been kind of sprinkled, but sure enough, it sprinkled on the lens and dried, and like, that ruins the whole photo. Sometimes you'll see right through that. Dang it, you know, so like a surgeon, go ahead and look at your lenses. I get warnings on my cell phone that say, need to clean your lens. Wow, that's kind of cool. So I was like, what? I don't know what's on it, but I was like, okay, I'll wipe that thing off. It knows you're not going to get as good of a photo. So same thing goes for, it's just as critical to clean those lenses as anything you do. Because you get a dirty one, nobody wants to look at your photo. Never thought there'd be that much importance in it, but it all started when we started changing and switching out lenses, and then we introduced that all these problems.
Yeah. I had it happen on those. The lens going in and out sucks.
Wow.
And after a couple of years,
yeah. And I never thought about that, but yeah, they're not. They can't be perfectly sealed. Yeah. Wouldn't.
The lens has to move.
Exactly. God, I never thought of that one. Yeah. So if you have whatever type of camera you have, it would be good to go ahead and research and say, what's the best lens cleaner? You wouldn't think you'd have to do that, but it's going to pay off. And we get to the little quick subject of batteries there. You know, always try to remember to charge before you go out on a photo shoot. But if you're using a drone, because you don't want it to fall down to the ground. And that could be a problem. Most of the time, most drones will know. They know how much energy they have. And they'll come back home, no matter what you do, they'll say, override you, I'm coming home because I can't stay up anymore. But do a review. If you're going to get a generic battery, read the reviews on it and see. A lot of them work fine because they know what the standard is to set. But why are some 150 and some are 75? And I looked at it on the drones. And in my case, I said, you know what, I'm not going generic on the drone because look what it has, look where it is. But I just got some for my Nikon camera. I said, all right, I read the reviews, how many milliamps per hour, all those things, wow, benchmark to exact specifications as the OEM, original equipment. So I was okay with it. But it comes to a drone, and that's up there. I'm going back with who built it. You know exactly what they were doing. Were they able to put a chump battery in there, and they didn't. So they signed off on good stuff, and never, ever substitute like a lithium for a NiCad, for example. You know, whatever that battery was that went in there, stick with that style of material. Don't ever switch out on that one. That'll cost you. So flash, you know, I just got one a couple of months ago, and that's another world to explore because you can dial these things down to where like they're 1/8 power. Or I'd be taking a photo of you, but I'll point it over here and flash off that wall, flash off that ceiling floor, whatever, so you don't get the red eye. But it illuminates so much, so perfectly, that most daytime shots where they're using a model, if it's not a cloudy day, and I used to do this a long time ago, I always had my flash on broad daylight, gets rid of every single shadow. But you dial down the power so it doesn't wash them out. But it's amazing what flash will do. I recommend if you have a high-end camera, and there's like 5 little pins up there on that little shoe, get one that fits those because it's not going to be the same. But you can read here where you know, it takes where the conditions are too dark, and you know, it'll balance out the daylight. And you can also freeze frame things like a Hummingbird. You can do that a little bit better. But there's all kinds of little things you can do creatively with the flash. It's just something to think about. And one thing, other comment on this is that the built-in flashes of like that bridge camera we saw at the very beginning, well, the higher end cameras, some of them have that built-in flash, and they're, to be honest with you, that's just an absolute joke compared to one of those. It's like 10 times minimum more power of light. It's going to clean up everything. And I think it was just a kind of a gimmick thing to put on there so in an emergency you could get a little bit of light, but it was horrible lighting on the built-ins. So it's food for thought. So lens hood, we'll kind of talk about that again. It does stop stray light from coming into the lens, which can create lens flare. If you want lens flare, and sometimes that's a neat effect, take that thing off. I recommend you put it right back on once you're done, because it does reduce the loss of contrast because there's less light hitting it from the side. It's got a perfect view. Even indoors, this helps. It protects the lens. God dang, I can't tell you how many times I said, thank God I had that lens hood on. I would have wiped out that glass, not thinking. Leaving on is good habit. At night, it absolutely reduces the stray light from car lights, porch light, whatever. It really keeps it nice and clean. And once again, as we talked about earlier, it absolutely delays the amount of time, the time that dew will form on your lens. And I've been out there for a solid hour or two, and there's that lens that's just kind of wet. And the inside there is bone dry. Had I not had that, I never thought that would have been a factor. Never thought about it. But I read about it, and I put one on. But you take that thing off, and your lens is going to start getting all kinds of dew on it. Excellent. So editing, you don't have to. If you get into where you're going to shoot in RAW, you have to edit if you shoot in RAW. But if you're going to go out and do a bunch of fun pictures, just leave it in JPEG and and enjoy it. It's just if you want to and you shoot in RAW, you have 4, 6, 8 times as much data that you can, maybe even 10 times as much data that you can play with, because you get to choose what to do with your photo, not the manufacturer. So Photoshop and Lightroom are 2 examples. There's other cheap ones. I use Lightroom, and it's $10 a month, but it's an unbelievable beast of an editing software. And not only that, for $10 a month, which I do a lot of editing, but you also get Photoshop. Well, I opened up Photoshop one time. I started looking at that. I thought, I have no idea. There's so much stuff in there. I actually was able to take a moon and the Mackinac Bridge and stick them together, and I don't even know how I did it. But there's like 10,000 bits of information in there. Like, I do stack moon shots or star shots in there, and that's cool. But so if you use RAW, you need editing software. Well, but Lightroom, God, it's easy to use, and it is powerful. About $10 a month, and you kind of be a little bit more serious about it. So that's RAW, and it didn't even look like that. It actually looked better than that there, but in RAW, it just said, here's a whole bunch of data for you to use. Get ready, and then here's the next photo. Turn. Same exact photograph. It's like photograph number 100. It's the same thing. So now you know what editing software can do. So, example, all that data was there, but I took and I turned this thing to a circle with my cursor in the middle, and I landed it right on that tree. And that circle went around all these trees. So it was a big circle. So actually what I did is I shrink the photo and I pinpoint with the cursor on a tree. Now, that cursor sees, and it's looking at that tree. What light is it seeing that cursor pinpointed? And I started dialing up the white. And it took all those birch trees and lit them up. I've got some other photos where it looks like a ghost ranch of birch trees. I mean, it's cool as all get out. So look at Picasso. Did Picasso sit there and do a true to life, art of people? Nope, but everybody liked it. So the beauty of things like Photoshop and editing software is that you get to create some stuff. And believe me, if you're walking down a mall and there's a bunch of calendars sitting there, that first photo was on the cover page, and then the calendar next to it is this one. You're going to pick this one up and take it home. You're going to skip that other one. So we're all the people out there saying, you Photoshopped it. Well, National Geographic takes an average of 5,000 photos for every one they print. Believe me, they're in there. They want it to be perfect for you, and they'll make you buy that magazine or subscribe it through the computer now. But anyway, I also took my cursor and I put it on a paintbrush and I swept up and down there once or twice. Not this one, just the lighthouse. No, that's all right. And it lit it up. So, and I could have actually taken that same paintbrush and just hit like exposure mode and just sweep across the trees, and it would start lighting up. Here comes the greenery. But I liked it just like that. But I just wanted to show you what editing software can do. The befores and afters are remarkable. And so we're getting here towards the end here. Now the internet and YouTube and Facebook, they are incredible resources for all of these things here: the purchasing, specification, repairs, clubs, interest groups, tips, techniques, and technical. It's unreal. That's how I found this club. There's another lady photographer friend, Beverly Wolf, said, you need to look up and get your stuff in, or join the club. So here comes Google, and sure enough, I found this place, and it's been fun ever since. And I learned stuff from everybody in this club too. And every time I learn every time I do something, I'm picking up information. And I never thought about that angle. So from everybody with the smallest to the biggest camera, you know, I'm never going to stop learning. There's more to come. And then, by the way, that's the 1840 lighthouse. And shooting out there, this is about 3 years ago when the water level was down. But look at that turquoise. I mean, this place is something else. So this is kind of to wrap it up. And by the way, I have all of this that I could email anybody, so they don't have to sit there and necessarily write it down. But these are the things that should make the difference here, where you can walk out the door, and at night you take a tripod always with you. You do long exposure times, play with your f-stop. And you're going to be anywhere from ISO 64 to 4 million. You just move it around and play with it. That's a very good thing for a tip on night shots. Because it depends. You might be where there's a bunch of neon lights, you dial it down. It might be a candle lit, and you brighten it up. For lightning, tripod, put it on your 30-second exposure or bulb. You're going to be playing with your low to high f-stops. And try to use your smallest ISO because you're going to be open the longest amount of time. Once again, pick a point on the horizon through your viewfinder. Okay, there's a water tower, there's a gas pump, everything in between there. I see a lightning strike in between there. I got my lightning strike. For astrophotography, God, it's so simple. ISO 6400, set your camera f2.8 and make it open at 6 to 10 seconds. And for the moon, you got to zoom in. For stars, you just leave it zoomed all the way back as far as you can. But it's not to say that you'll go out and this will be perfect, but I guarantee you that's a super good place to start. I called it, this one guy called me. I said, just write those 3 things down. He went down and told me later, says, wow, I didn't know that was even in my camera. So it's just a good place to start. But once again, I went up to ISO 10,000 and dropped that down to 2 seconds. I couldn't believe what I got. But I have a wide, clear 1.4 lens. So anyway, just look at your camera, you can kind of play with those numbers, and you are now an astrophotographer with that little bit of information. You'll be floored. And then the moon, once again, perfect place to start. ISO 100, because that thing is so bright. Try to get a quarter of a second, maybe faster. You have to play around with it. But F11 to F16, the reason is that's not letting in as much light, but there's plenty of light, and it makes it crystal clear focus-wise. So you would think that moon, what the moon says, 260,000 miles away, whatever it is, you'd think at infinity. That thing would be in focus on your camera. So one other comment. I can't believe how I had to figure out where infinity in focus was on each of my lenses. It floored me, because I'm thinking, you can't use autofocus, it doesn't work. So you put it in manual mode and you say, all right, there's the infinity symbol. I'm just going to go all the way to the max out. Not even close. So an infinity symbol where it looks like this, dead center on that axis of that pinpoint, it's not in focus. I hair-like move that focus ring ever so slightly past that center of the infinity symbol, and there it is. And anything past that, it's not crystal clear. I could not believe that something 260,000 miles away was that critical. So once again, if you have live view, then try to get as best as you can focus and zoom in on live view. Need to move it around a little bit, and then you're there. Same thing for stars. My gosh, so if you try to pick an object that's like 200 feet away, and that's really infinity at night. So if you can focus in on something, then try to check your lens and see, that's exactly where that infinity symbol lines up with the crosshair. You just memorize that when you go and start shooting. But anyway, so that's the fun thing. I mean, I took this tip out here, and I started shooting astrophotography, but I had to clean some of this up in Lightroom. So the final thing is, if you have any questions or ideas, we can probably take some questions, but there's my email, and I get questions all the time. I ask questions of other people all the time. So I mean, it's not like I'm just a photographer, but I have a lot of fun with it. And that's, by the way, a thunderstorm. I was sitting there at the Portage store, and I knew that the Apple door, which is right here, schooner, Apple door 4 was out there, and I was going to go meet that captain. I saw this thunderstorm building up. I went, oh boy, that's going to line up perfectly. So I went down the beach and it literally didn't look anything like this, but I watched it unfold. I have hardly touched this photograph with editing software. It looked just like that, pink. And I couldn't believe it. I've never seen anything like it. And this looked like it kind of looks like a face here, and there's a mouth opened up and a fire coming out of something's mouth. But it's like, and there was people with me, so when they saw me post it on Facebook, they go, yeah, you know what? You didn't fix it up. That's how it looked like. Right place, right time is 99.9% of any of my photos. That was pretty dramatic. But so anyway, I'm at your beck and call. If there's any questions, don't hesitate to email me. If I don't know, I'll try to find out an answer. But who knows it all? This session could have gone on for 2 days. Oh man. So anyway, I hope that everybody had fun. I hope that what happens is that when you go out, you'll find it a little bit more challenging, a little bit less challenging, but a little bit more exciting when you go out. But the only thing that'd be challenging is that you would challenge yourself just a little bit more to try to explore some of these fun settings. And with that, I'll turn it back over.
Does anybody in the Zoom meeting have questions? Just unmute yourself and ask questions. Patty, if you're talking to us, you have to unmute yourself. We got a couple thank yous.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. I know this is hard to sit there and and listen to. I try to change my voice up and things, but it's hard. It's hard to do this, and I appreciate everybody coming out here and listening. And so once again, I just open it up to if there's any questions down the road or something. Just always feel free to contact me on there or on Facebook. I'm always looking for that next good photograph, I always try to beat the last one, but then you get one of them and go, well, that can't be beat. But I can't top that one. I don't know what's going to happen in nature that I'll be there and it'll be this good. Once again, it wasn't me. I sat there and pushed the button. Nature gave this to me, but it's like, well, that's how some of these guys and men and women get these beautiful photos. They're just right place and the right time. And lately, with the Presqu'île compared to Texas, I've seen a lot more right place, right time photos because of where we live. It's just beautiful.
Out of curiosity, with your drone, how big of a space do you take off from?
Oh, size of a cardboard table, max.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I mean, that's sufficient clearance.
No, it goes straight up. It's a helicopter.
Right.
Yeah, so I need no space. I just make sure that it's clear above me. When it comes back,
check the tree canopy. Right?
Yeah, right.
You could fly it right into the building right in here.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, and they do.
I have a question.
Yes.
Are you familiar with the app called Before You Fly?
I heard about it. I have not checked it.
I use that on my,
For wind and things like that?
no, it tells you whether you're near an airport or whether you should take off, you cannot fly or beware.
That's built into mine. It's built in.
Right.
So I update mine all the time. It is automatic, which is one reason I bought it.
I
Yeah.
just pushed it and it says cleared to take off.
Yeah.
Now, if I was
Yeah.
close to an airport,
Right.
it would tell me not to.
That's me too, because ours is always updating. Yeah. And I did bypass that one time. I was in Atlanta, and you could hear an airplane 20 miles away. So I thought, okay, I'll go up a couple hundred feet.
This is a good thing just to have in your.
Yeah. Well, see, mine's built in, but it is good because.
I'm sure mine's built in
Yeah.
too, but I don't use it unless it comes on automatically.
Yeah.
I have to pay attention, but I always check this.
And that's a great thing to check. So I know that when I fire mine up though, it's already telling me you can't go. It already knows.
Right.
Yeah, I don't get to choose for it. I mean, wherever I set that thing, it's already got the geofence built because I got the GPS coordinates, and it'll tell you right there you're not going up.
And you're right there. You're near the airport when we would fly.
I am.
Mine said you're near the airport. Flying your own risk.
Okay, so I think there's a difference in saying fly at your own risk, and one of them says you're not going up.
Right.
I think, because that one in Atlanta, Michigan, I knew where the airport was, and so I know at 400 feet I was underneath that. A plane's not going to hit, but what if it was landing? And I went,
That's
So
Does it just disable itself?
You have to, I can't set it up. It won't go up. So I told it, geofence me and don't let me override. Well, I could probably really override it. I'd have to screw with it to do it. Yeah, but it probably can be done, but they know who you are too. They know, I swear, if you crash the kind we have, you just call up DJI and they'll say, yeah, you can go to the exact coordinate and there's your drone. They know where it is, which is pretty cool. But
Yeah, I know my drone, there's an outfit there, wherever you're,
yeah,
I don't know why it does that. I did turn the volume down.
yeah, that's all right.
It's, there's something in your drone, you cannot delete the information.
Right.
Cannot delete it, no matter what.
Right, it's gonna, it's gonna be trouble in it.
Yes, I do, but I'll make sure. Thanks. Yeah, it's a good app. It's always good to have that look at before you do anything, and then save your time.
Okay,
Thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
okay, online, we're gonna sign off now unless there's any questions. Thank you for attending.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for showing up, and hope I didn't bore you to death.
No, I've learned, I'm new to droning.
Okay, yeah.
I've only had about 6 months, I've rarely played with it.
I know. I see. Well, when I got mine, like I was saying earlier.
Do you have a photo book or something?
Yes, I do. It's
Is that- if
it's
they
actually at the Portage store, but I have them at my house too that I can sell.
Okay, if you would need a book, write the email,
Yeah.
to Eugene's email. Thank you.
2 months.